Okay. Everyone can hear me okay. Or see how the recording turns out altogether. Um, I wanted to give an update to everyone based on what we've been doing in the open source office, intersect with the future vision of Cardano is. We've been kind of basically boots on the ground, just been marching forward since my last update, getting a lot of things moving. And we are building up to a bigger vision now. And we just concluded the trip in Vienna, Austria, for the open source summit, just to kind of get our name and the Cardano blockchain into the mind of these Web 2 folks from the Web 3 world, because ironically, it's a dynamic relationship where Web 3 environments need the Web 2 open source principles, but the Web 2 people need the technology from the Web 3 people, so that way they can evolve that way while we evolve from past lessons. So it's a unique dynamic. We got to partner a lot with the Hyperledger, now the LF Decentralized Trust folks. I do recommend anyone to go check out their stuff they're doing with Hedera. And then we also, from the Cardano side, help donate with the Atala team Identis on their project. And so we're going to try to build a community collaboration with them there. Um, but I did want to do this as a brief catch up on where we are. And let me see if I actually can share my screen. Yeah, there we go. So just so everyone remembers, I did the why state of Cardano, why open source a while back. These are still the key issues we're marching towards. We may do a survey at the end of the year, the same one, just to make sure this is still where we're marching to. The strategy, we hit 5 pillars, and then there's 5 goals associated. We should be able to complete 4 of the 5 goals. The only one that's left out is the diversification of maintainers, i.e. making sure it's paid maintainers. But we have hit a certain percentage on there. We'll do the final math and do a review on that towards the end of Q3. And then this is everything the open source office is doing. This is actually expanded, but I wanted to give y'all this slide here so that you see how the open source committee and the open source office have been partnering to actually address these concerns. And it's not like we chose these willy-nilly and then we're like, let's do these different initiatives for control or anything like that. Instead, this is actually enabling us to build to a bigger picture, which is what I wanted to get out to. So I've been looking with experts from IEEE, Hyperledger, Apache Foundation now, Bitergia, Red Hat, and OpenSFF in the Linux Foundation. Basically, a lot of the prominent players who have established practices for open source in the Web 2 world, as well as Web 3. They're what helped us carve out the open source model here at Intersect. But it's to build a solution to a prominent problem in open source fundamentally, which is open source traditionally relies on companies to sponsor employees and then give back some of those employees' time to open source projects, or it's based on volunteers who have incredible passion to be overworked and contribute that way. I think the most infamous lesson learned from that was like Log4j, which was this tiny little library that several Fortune 100 companies built on top of. So it was a pebble with only a couple, maybe 2 or 3 maintainers on the project who didn't make it frequent updates. And tech stacks were massive mountains built on this tiny pebble. And there was some malware or something like that that caused a breach, and all these companies got mad that these maintainers weren't giving up their lives when they weren't being paid by any of them on this open source project and demand that they fix all the issues. And that's kind of where open source gets a bad rep altogether, because it is, you're just building something, you throw it up there for anyone to use, but then the people who take it and abuse it and use it want you to give your life away to it when it was just a passion project. It's part-time and you may want to walk away from it. So what working with people or these experts, we're trying to see, because Web3, especially in Cardano, we have a unique situation to actually address these issues and course correct. So we've been doing a lot of research and theory crafting. And that's where I'm trying to unveil what I'm calling the paid open source model. This is theoretically still in draft because I'm working on a white paper for it. But I'll go through this high level. It's the fifth slide that actually gets us into the nuts and bolts of it. But essentially, this paid open source model combines principles of open source software with sustainability and supporting the developers um, at the forefront of it. Now, the cool thing about this is it is basically a world first with the interesting dynamics Cardano brings to the table. That's not a traditional Web2 environment. And there is a similar thing the German government has done, which is kind of setting up a fund that pays for open source projects. But there's a lot of bureaucracy and red tape that goes with that, and it's a centralized manner of how the decision making is done. And since it's a government budget, it can be cut at any time. What we are going to be doing is quite different, and I'll get into the mechanisms of that. But essentially, the reason why we're going for a paid open source model is we want to be able to compensate. This is like my developer advocate program. It's not to give full-time roles or full-time compensation to maintainers, but it's enough incentive for them to stick around, work on the projects, and ensure that they have a form of liability to it. But also it gets rid of the issue of you giving up your life without getting some kind of payback for it. And then we also, with different things I'll get into, basically are ensuring that these are merit-based people who fulfill these roles, and it's not just one person in each of our projects. Cardano is taking a unique approach to this. But essentially, the key concepts are open source that you need to know. Anyone can inspect, modify, and enhance your code. Sustainability, which is providing financial support to developers, maintainers to ensure long-term project viability. And then there's other ideas in deck that's more than just open source, or this one program that I'm targeting specifically for Cardano. But there's different strategies for how to generate revenue to sustain projects. Because when you're in an open source project, you fall in two categories, which is you're an open source library. And if your business built on that, your hope is to consult on the libraries that you built, and or the open source is just a small component of the product you're trying to sell. And then obviously the other project side of it is the products. And I have a model to help explain what this is. But what I'm trying to do is ensure, at least through my sphere of influence at Intersect, we have other players at large that will help influence the implementation of this if we all have a concurrent path. But at least within Intersect's remit, every project that comes within our space or that we can support, I am trying to ensure the longevity, financial support, and consultation of best practice implementation for these projects. Because the end goal of what we're doing with Cardano is to get commercial adoption, and not just commercial, but like the evangelism of Cardano to be implemented on in several different fronts. And we just need to move forward. And the best marketing thing that Cardano has always had is robust tech. And if we can add in a sustainable open source model where you don't have to worry about companies paying employees to sustain code, but that's inherent to the blockchain itself supporting this mechanism, you are building a world's first in a different way. You have solid tech, solid developers, and it gets rid of so much risk mitigation when you're trying to target businesses to building on a permissionless chain. But the benefits are kind of straightforward: quality and innovation, community support, and economic viability. And the economic viability is like the highest for this, but the most immediate benefits are for the developers and people working in our space. It's going to encourage you to still have your open source passion, but you're also making sure you have some revenue returning into your project that isn't beholden to any certain person. So the reason why we're doing this is self-evident for supporting the developers, but we are trying to enhance quality. Right now, Cardano has been built on a lot of quality, but it's kind of been at the remit of certain companies doing all that work. And as we're moving into this decentralized fashion, we're going to get people who are not founding entities to be working on this. as well as just community developers, and I want a way to sustain them with the unique features that the Chang Hard Fork is allowing us to do with our governance model. And I think this will also give us security enhancements. And this will probably actually attract talent that hasn't been tapped into in Cardano, hopefully. And then the thing is reduce burnout and sustainable funding, ensuring longevity of all our projects. So that's key reasons why. Now, this is an old slide for why I started my whole open source focus. I.e., back in the day, we were always comparing Intersect or Cardano to the Hyperledger model because it's very similar to things that we're doing. And I've been consulting with Daniela and Hart basically from the get-go. But essentially, you can ignore some of the wordage in this, but the first couple points are still critical. Is i.e. Cardano wasn't efficiently open source. The future state, we have an efficient open source practice, and I would say we're like 80% of the journey. If we get this model set up, I'm pretty confident we're like there. We just got to do the tighten all the bolt essentially to make sure this framework holds. But basically, you do open source because it gets more enhancement, attraction, and eyes on a project. More people are willing to use it, which creates higher utility rather than just the backlog inside an internal IP. And essentially, with the Chang hard fork, we are now having the with the Chang hard fork. Now we are at this situation where we have the Cardano treasury to utilize, but it needs to be utilized very wisely. And the idea that I think is being missed by most is the treasury has only a certain lifeline depending on the spend that goes into it. And I know that's why certain guardrails are put in the Constitution, at least the interim one. And I hope the new Constitution, whenever that gets ratified by the community, has similar mindsets in line that we need the treasury to sustain itself at least to a 5-year runway if we can, just to ensure that Cardano has the enablement for this big investment to hit, but that we are building in commercial adoption at the forefront of every end goal. That way we are replenishing the treasury. The treasury runs dry. We have to survive on transaction fees, and that's going to make it difficult for everyone. So 2025 is like our critical year of concept, and we have to do this right. And open source is kind of the delivery of this business plan. These are the 2 points to figure out. I would say overall, Cardano doesn't have an efficient business plan as us as a collective community. We know commercial adoption's there, but no one collectively has come together and figure out this is how we do it. So that's what we're trying to do, at least from the Intersect perspective with the community players that I do have interested in this initiative. So this is my thesis, what I am trying to do. Now, ignore the arrows of green. They are just, it's not direct money flow, quote unquote. Anything that's leading into Intersect from the Treasury, Intersect is not generating revenue. It's not paying our bills or anything like that. The idea behind this is that this is funds that we request from the Treasury that are going to lead into all these different community projects, and it's a self-sustaining cycle. So starting from the top, essentially, the open source office is the inside of Intersect. And inside Intersect's house, we have something we're calling the 6 steps, which each of the committees within Intersect play some form or function into this. But the 6 steps are how you get software development done. And that's the ideation, or the productization. So you figure out your idea, mostly academic rigor is what we do. Then once that's been vetted, it turns into a product, and we want to all the features that should be in it, your focus groups, things like that, try and find market fit. Then we do the technical validation of it, which is your 3rd step, making sure that it can be implemented. Then we get into budgeting to ensure there's funds to help develop it. We implement it, and then we measure the success. It's very basic concept, nothing controversial there. But what I did from my perspective is with those 2 blue circles, I'm trying to target the different paid open source practices that exist and how we can implement them. Now, I'm starting with these two because they are established examples, at least for the different steps that we can support. Now, the first one called the code for us model, I have a slide to go in detail on this, but essentially this is, I think it's code with us. I'm calling it code for us because I mistranslated it when I wrote everything. But essentially, it's like a bug bounty for projects for feature enhancement, i.e., there's a bucket of funds. Projects can tap into this, or it's given them a certain allocation or company sponsorships wherever the money does come from. The idea is there's a bucket of money, and if they need a certain feature developed, they can put it out there like a bug bounty program where I need this, here's this reward. Some developer will come along or contributor, put that together, and then claim the reward after it's tested by that team. And that kind of could help with theory crafting ideas and productization. But the big thing that I've aligned with the open source committee to put in our budget is something that's a new concept, which is a maintainer retainer program. And it's unique because we have the Cardano Treasury to help us assist on this, because this is utilizing the Treasury to its purpose, which is giving back to the community altogether. Now, um, as you can see in the bottom, there's those two items I was mentioning before, which is the products and the open source libraries. The maintainer retainer piece is very focused on the open source library side of it. And I have set up an open source library working group to help me with this initiative. But essentially, what the maintainer retainer piece is going to do is it's going to allow us to identify what our core, the Cardano as a whole, the core projects are that our tech stack is built on, um, and assist putting community maintainers in there and compensating them per month to maintain those repos and put a contract associated with that work. That way, everything's insured and there's expected delivery, and we can track development milestones, etc. And it's specifically targeted to community members. The current idea, and the numbers may change on this, is we are targeting 50 repositories as a test case at $1,500 a month for 2 maintainers on each of those projects. Now, core Cardano, quote unquote, what we have at Intersect is like 28 to 29 repos. So that leaves, if we do 50 repositories, that leaves 21 or more, depending on what we break out for that. And then some of the core repositories may not be needed because they're covered based in development management contracts with other companies. But this is that tying into bringing in community people, and there's a lot more detail to this that I'll get into, but that allows us to ensure that there's a sustainable tech stack that actually attracts businesses to come build on Cardano. Because if you have 50 repositories covered and there's community maintainers for that, that builds the sustainability layer where anyone who's building on those tech stacks has an way to continuously be interacting with these people. And compensation could increase. It just depends on community demand. And then the DREPs, SPOs, whoever votes on the Treasury withdrawal actions would have to be the people to go through that process. Otherwise, with this 1 year, that's what we're targeting, high level, unless the committee changes that in the next week or so. But we will, through the open source committee, always try to make sure this is within our budget as long as the community as a whole votes on it to instill. Now, I'm taking it back up into the box of Intersect. So this paid open source model, it's not just about the maintainer, retainer, and the code for us model. Those are two different initiatives that the Treasury could help support open source projects. But regardless, if those aren't there, everything in red is what I can do and I'm directly influencing. And this is where the open source office is doing the project support services right there in the bucket. So within the project support services, I think I covered this in a previous YouTube video, i.e. there's like 8 categories of things that we offer to projects. There's a free level that we give to anyone in the Cardano community. That's like the project spotlight, which is some marketing services. We have some templates we can give, consultation on open source practice, general things like that. Then there is the Intersect member specific benefits. If you're a member, we can help within our bandwidth with some technical documentation, even more consultation, direct marketing, stuff like that. And then there is the complex service piece, which is if you need like a lot of work done, we will work with you within our remit. And there might be a certain surcharge on that. but there's a discount if you're a Intersect member, and we're still flushing that out and it's in detail. But the biggest example would be our new official metrics partner, Bitergia. They actually are an open dashboard for us to basically understand where projects' health is going, your rates, basically who's contributing to your project, where your development is, where you're lacking, how you can build a bigger community. It's to introduce this data-driven decision making, and they are big open source experts as a whole. So we will be working with them where our dashboard that we use at Intersect is open for anyone to use. We can actually do direct consultation with Intersect projects or members of Intersect using Bitergia. Rather than just giving you a general view. And then we can actually bring in Bitergia for education classes for Intersect members. And then for if you need the direct consultation, we can negotiate rates for you and stuff like that for them. The other piece to this is we do have the strategic partnerships, which is not just what Intersect can offer, but what we can partner with the community for to expand Surface offerings altogether. And obviously, they would address what we would encourage in there is they have a few free things that they may do to help market their things, but these are Cardano business members or people in the community who are running business. So we will try to negotiate good rates for them to provide your services, and Intersect kind of be an info broker for all these things. Now, and that covers the big umbrella with the strategic partnerships too, because that includes things like our partnership with Hyperledger, the Linux Foundation, trying to build this bridge into the Web 2, Web 3 world, but also making sure we have collaboration going back and forth. And the partners can also help with developing different products and helping commercial adoption, which is the end goal here. Now, coming down from the Intersect bucket, that's where we get into our project incubation piece. And this is important because this is how Intersect is going to be grading projects all together. And I think I have a YouTube recording on this too. But essentially, we're trying to give 5 categories for projects where you're incubating. You just came in, you submit your project to be a part of this incubation piece, and we help strategically guide your project. It's meant to be, the idea behind it was if you went to Catalyst and you got funding and you got your MVP, but you don't know what's next, you can come into Intersect or apply for your project to be submitted, and we take it in. Similar to how other foundations do, with review from the internal committees to make sure it aligns with our goals as well, or the goals of our membership base is the best way to put it. And then we either put you in incubation, which is sandbox, which will offer consultation services, help build your practice, etc. Then if you meet certain criteria, you can go to the growth phase, which in turn can lead to some investment, but more time management for us to try and get you to the mature phase, which is basically where our core Cardano projects are. And that's where a lot of development contracts and things come in. And that's how, in a regulatory space, you justify spending of even the treasury itself to these projects, just to make sure there's no antitrust and things like that. And then the other 2 phases are basically if you start declining from the acceptance criteria, we'd give a 1-year remit, which I think is the decline phase, where we try to bring you back to green. We do everything in our power to ensure you're still in green. And then the 5th phase is if the project's no longer needed, it becomes a public archive or we abandon it, which is the abandonment phase. But that gives us clear criteria to measure and guide how we are interacting with projects. And then we also have the contribution ladder, which ties in that maintainer retainer piece, which is we are trying to build a standard guideline for how we are measuring contribution and building merit to be in a open source project. And that way it kind of gives you a badge or a stamp to be like, this, I've made this journey. But essentially you'd go from new contributor to, I think it's 4 phases right now, where it's new contributor to committer to trusted committer and then maintainer. And each of those comes with their things. I do a video on that if I haven't already. Actually, I think there's a YouTube video on it. But that helps us justify the spend. So if you're a maintainer, retainer, you've gone through this, you've gone through the trial program we're putting together, and then you're compensated for your work. That way, it's not just anybody can apply and money is given to anybody. The subject matter is you've gone through these processes, you have proven your merit, and therefore you justify the compensation. Now, in this open source projects, going back to those 2 layers, we have products and open source libraries. And I've been thinking from my perspective how I can support both of those. And that's where the 2 working groups come in to help. we do have a commercialization working group. Essentially, they are trying to be the strategic direction from community stakeholders about commercial adoption for Cardano altogether. How do we help projects become more entrepreneurial minded, more business organized, help set up their business model use cases, and take these projects and connect them to the three buckets listed under commercial adoption, which is your venture capitalists. I think everyone knows VCs. We kind of need some in Cardano, but there's also they have their strategies on what they invest in, and they expect certain maturity within projects. So what we're trying to do is through this incubation, the contribution ladder, and the maintainer retainership piece, there's building this merit and risk mitigation associated with projects that go through this that will be attractive to VCs to want to invest because work has been done, proven, and there's not going to be a fallback, less of a fallback on a project potentially by being involved in that. So that's to help projects build more capital and not just rely on constant grant requests and stuff like that, but actually have angel investors and VCs to back them to help them continue to develop their project to help them find clients. The other piece to that is the clients with money. We do a bunch of networking ourselves. I already got 2 projects in the pipeline where I've met a client somewhere, I've connected them with diverse, at least my strategy is if I meet someone, I bring in 2 different Cardano community people that I know who are not correlated to each other to build out the project and try to collaborate and solve that issue. And then I leave it to them to take forward. And so that's where the commercialization working group's trying to connect clients with money to the people who can build the solution that they're willing to pay for and help curate that project through similar process that we would do the VCs. And just make sure that there's certain standard guidelines for all the projects being developed. And then obviously we do have the tech innovation piece. This is where a bunch of the Catalyst projects come up. If you weren't an open source library from Catalyst, but you're a product trying to make money, this is where we would try to invest and help your project grow to find clients. So that way you build your own example. It's trying to basically help like a book.io or Cornucopias get up and running. And that way they're independent of anyone else, but we helped nurture them to that. Not saying we take credit for anything. And then for the open source libraries, the piece of that was the open source library working group. The remit of this working group, which I'm setting up to run next week, is we're going to scan Cardano ecosystem for all the current open source projects that are there, the libraries that could be built on, collate what the core tech stack is up to that 50 repo remit and submit that in the maintainer retainer piece. But also we're trying to build an ecosystem map of sorts of what is in the, I know there's different variations of this in multiple places, but we're going to try to build a system that highlights just the open source libraries, highlights who's in the maintainership of those projects, but also do a benefit analysis. Because the whole goal of this is if a business is coming to Cardano and they want to build here, what is there and what are the benefits associated with all the different projects? Because some projects you could call quote unquote redundant, but they have different perspectives on why they built. And so we want to highlight what those are so businesses know what they're looking at. And if they build on that, that helps hit the commercial adoption piece too. Now, once we're in commercial adoption, that's where you're hitting the sustainability factor to this. We basically, with commercial adoption, we're increasing transaction volumes, which replenish the treasury, which feeds back into the whole cycle. Now, Intersect's banner is here, but this could be with other mechanisms too. How the structure needs to be is that we are doing everything we can with a little kickstart from the treasury to build into this. And that's why I have revenue models with Intersect up here too. Depending on how Intersect brings in revenue, I would one day like to cut the need for the treasury to fund it. And that way we have built a truly sustainable piece based on whatever the practices are. But from the bootstrap phase, this is how you build a successful, sustainable paid open source model to ensure projects have every chance to thrive. This is the support structure that I am encouraging, trying to get out there and make sure that we can try and implement in 2025 so there's no variance in it. It's kind of a world's first in a way. distinctly because it gets rid of the bureaucracy when it comes to certain people control the budget, etc. Because it's the Cardano treasury, it has to be used for the community focus, and only if the community wants any of these programs can it be voted on. That's the key distinguishing feature here. Two, it goes full circle in the sense that commercial adoption has to be tracked and managed to ensure that the treasury has a life cycle more than 3 to 5 years. Now, all of this is really cool programs, but they're only a supporting substructure. Open source just enables utility. If we don't give the best project success to getting people with the right minds and getting Cardano expanded compared to where we are now, we need more institutions in here and more clients in here for doing all these things and making sure everything's successful. That's my current critique of our situation. This is what I'm trying to build to ensure we get this done. But this is the most transparent model, attacks the core roots of open source practices, but removes a bunch of the corporate control over these factors. This is where our governance model is unique, and we have this different aspiration. The other bubbles associated with commercial adoption, these are kind of pieces that lead into what we need. We need to figure out how to get businesses business alliances. I'm working to discover this piece. It's TBD at the moment because I don't understand it much. But if you're going to get a permissionless blockchain integrated with a supply chain network, you got to get multiple businesses online at the same time. Usually they're in alliance, so you got to build these support structures in some way to actually market it. Obviously, we need the market research and ecosystem mapping. IOG has something going on with this. Cardano Cube does a good job, and I'm building one specifically for open source libraries. So I think what we need is a standard structure or an open source library with the tooling there that anyone can take and use for their purposes, because ecosystem mapping is not unique. They're one set lens. There's multiple lenses to view our space. So I think that's where it comes back to informing us. If we know what the layout of the land is, we can make better decision making within Intersect, or at least I can make better decision making based on where our landscape is and how the different support structures to make sure we're going somewhere. The only other thing I didn't cover was our developer advocates here. Obviously, they're here to help with the onboarding journey, and they basically own the definition of the contribution ladder. I'm letting them define it. I just gave what's best practice currently, and we're going to outline and finalize that over the next month or 2 weeks. But this is the idea behind it. Here's some other funding mechanism ideas, but everything in the bottom for common monetization strategies not looking into right now. There's different ways to potentially get funding for projects, but that's not what I'm focused on. The thing that I'm going for is the code forest, the maintainer retainer. The retainer piece is a must because it's not been done before, and that will help landmark Cardano in more outlets. But yeah, if anyone has any questions ever or on anything, please reach out to me. And looking forward to the future. But this is the thesis we have going and what my vision for Cardano in a paid open source environment looks like. Thank you. Once again, Christian, head of the open source office. I'm that open source guy, or dat open source guy on Discord. I'm the open source guy on X, and just normal name on LinkedIn. But you can find us anywhere. And Tex is helping me with this with a bunch of others. But yeah, looking forward to the future. Thank you all.